Welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thank you so much for joining me again on another edition of the podcast. This is actually episode number 50 of the podcast. So, really cool stuff. Thank you, everybody, for coming along this journey. If you've listened to the last couple of episodes, you've noticed that I've had a couple of female voices, women voices on the pod. And that's because I really think inclusion in sports is such an important thing. And I don't talk a lot of baseball on here, but to help me kind of change that a little bit is Neha from Girls at the Ballpark. Neha, thank you so much for joining me on the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, again, I mentioned this in the past couple episodes. What started as a innocuous Threads post led to being exposed to all these great women's sports creators. And I really found your kind of motif and with Girls at the Ballpark is a very interesting thing. And so I kind of want to get into that. But before that, I guess what was the driving moment for you that got you into baseball? Like for me, when I loved baseball as a kid, and for me, it was like the Ken Griffey Jr. era, right? And I lived in New York City at the time. And, so the Yankees and Mets were both kind of relevant and winning a lot in the late 90s, and that kind of drove that interest. So for you, where did your interest in baseball come from?
Well, actually, my parents took me to my first baseball game when I was only 6 months old.
Oh, wow.
We went to Dodger Stadium to see the Astros because we had just moved to California from Houston after I was born. But ironically, I didn't go to another baseball game until I was roughly about like 8 years old or so. My childhood best friend actually got tickets from her dad to go to an Angels game. So she asked me if I wanted to come along. And I said, sure. By that time, I was living in Orange County. That's where I've largely grown up. And I just remember going, thinking, I'm just going to have a good time with my friends. And, just loving the entire experience of everything and having so much fun. I had a rough knowledge of baseball at that point, but definitely wasn't as immersed in it as I am now. But I remember thinking, we both had so much fun. It's can we just watch baseball all the time? And so we would go over to each other's houses on Saturdays. And at that time, we could watch so much baseball all day because you could watch the Braves on TBS, we could watch the Cubs on WGN, and then of course locally we had the Angels and Dodgers. And so that was how I got my education really in baseball and learning about the players, especially the 90s Braves, that starting rotation and whatnot. And I think I've also been spoiled because I think a lot of what helped grow my love for it was the accessibility that I had to it. Growing up in Northern Orange County, Angel Stadium was just a 10-minute, 15-minute drive. And so it was very easy to get to. It was easy to get tickets and, participate in the game day experience. And I also happened to grow up with a lot of kids that were the children of current and former Angels players at the time. So I found myself kind of surrounded by baseball a lot of the time. And so I think that just has kind of helped me exponentially grow my love from childhood to now. Just being able to have all the accessibility to everything. It wasn't necessarily a particular person or anything like that, but definitely Griffey, Derek Jeter is my favorite player ever. And everything that's come along the way, I think, is just what really invigorated my passion for the game.
It's so fascinating you say that because I feel the same way personally about basketball, because growing up in New York City, the park game is so prevalent, the street ball game is so prevalent, and obviously when the Knicks are doing good, the city's just on fire, and you end up getting all these people who just have this passion about it. And to hear that for a different sport on the other side of the country is super interesting to me. And it's you say you're close to the Angels, obviously the Dodgers right there, and I feel like California has always been that kind of baseball haven, and we're seeing it now, as the Dodgers are an elite team in the sport and
Great.
and all that. I want to talk about your platform here. So in your profile on Instagram and on Threads, you say that you're looking to create a safe space for all baseball fans, especially women and non-binary people. And so I guess what drove you to have that kind of focus for content? Was there something that you kind of saw that was missing, and you're like, hey, let's attack this and get more voices out there? So what was the motivation behind that?
Yeah, definitely that. What's interesting is that originally my intent when I started the platform was, as someone who has traveled to 30 ballparks, and many of them I've done solo, I came across a lot of conversation, both online and in person, with other women who either did the same thing or, were interested in doing that, or were just going to games but didn't feel comfortable going solo. And so I wanted to create a platform where those women could essentially find each other. And, from the same fan bases in the cities, whatever it is, that they could not only feel comfortable doing these things, whether on their own or with like these new people they connected with, or even just discuss, because again, like a women's experience, like in traveling or doing anything, is going to be different than a man's. And there's just going to be certain things that you're not going to necessarily find, given through the advice of men or online in guides, anything like that. And so that was, so in a weird way, it was like almost like the safe space was also in a way like physically being safe. But then I think, especially after the election happened and, the toxicity that we see often with X, it was important for me to kind of pivot and realize that I did have an opportunity, as I was growing my following, to create a platform and create a space where everyone felt comfortable coming to and being able to talk with other people, about baseball, regardless of what their fan base was, and especially even new fans of the game, because there are, and I'm seeing it even like as of like yesterday and today, like there are people posting about, especially women, that I'm a new fan to baseball. Like, what should I know? How can I learn the game? And I think, Threads has been a great place for that. So far, I've seen everybody be really welcoming. And, I feel like in other spaces, these individuals might not get that same opportunity, and feel like they are comfortable enough to ask questions, and talk with other people. And I have a zero tolerance like policy, basically, that if you're going to come in here and start like attacking someone that is following me because of how you feel about like their fan base or whatever it is, it's like, I'm removing you, I'm blocking you, because that's not what this is for. Like, I want people to feel like they're comfortable being able to talk about something, even if they're not fully knowledgeable about the game, about a team, about a player, about the rules, whatever it is. And so it's been really great, because I don't always feel like I'm necessarily doing anything crazy or important, but I do get feedback often that's like, well, thank you for creating this space. And it makes me realize, like, yes, this is something that's good that I'm doing, and I'm glad I did it, and just to keep moving forward with it. I think another opportunity kind of arises because with some of the, especially within baseball media, the companies that have been, more popular in the last couple of years or so, have been largely founded and driven by cis white men. And
Yes.
I think a lot of their focus, especially on platforms like X and in other areas, is, content aggregation, content stealing. A lot of stuff is rooted in rage bait. And it's just alienating a significant fan base of individuals that want to feel like they're connected to the game, and that is, with women and those that don't necessarily identify as male. And so I felt that there is an opportunity here to, as a female, have a voice, not be really interested in doing that sort of like rage bait content or trying to drive views and likes and things for that reason. And I think that's been really refreshing and welcoming. And I think that's why a lot of people are interested in continuing to follow the platform. And so that's really kind of where like my motivation and what drove me to create this.
You brought up so many great points there, and there's a couple couple follow-ups I have. But the first thing is, what you said there kind of about the establishment of baseball media is so important. I'm a big believer that independent content creators, independent journalists, videographers, bloggers, whatever, they're so important in this space to kind of offer new perspectives,
Mhm.
and baseball especially has kind of been, I guess, pigeonholed and associated as this kind of the old white man covering sport, right?
Yeah.
More so than the other major sports in the U.S. And so I think it's incredibly important to have those diverse voices and bring more people in, so people don't feel that they're excluded because it's like all I see are people that look like Peter Gammons, you know. And no disrespect to Peter Gammons, obviously a
Yeah.
established journalist, and Jeff Passan does good work and all that,
Mhm.
but it's something to see something that's more identifiable with a wider range of people. I guess to that point, do you feel that historically, or at least in the last 20, 30 years, we've seen a little bit too much gatekeeping when it comes to baseball? Like, I feel like there's a very traditionalist vibe that a lot of people have, and it almost feels, to a certain degree, like golf in a weird way, where you're like, well, you can't just come in here, there's a certain thing. So do you feel that way, or is that kind of maybe not the case anymore?
I mean, for me personally, as an individual, I'm very much like, I don't, can I curse on there?
Of course, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was like, I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Because especially for me, as someone who is a woman of color, my entire existence has been like occupying spaces that traditionally have I've been told I don't belong in. So for
Mhm.
me personally, like I'm just like I don't care what the gatekeeping is, like your rules don't apply to me. Like I'm going to break through that gate whether you like it or not.
Mhm.
But obviously that's not going to be the case for everyone, and I do agree that in the wider scheme of things that yes, I do feel that there is still a lot of gatekeeping, and I do think that part of that also goes into the conversation that I know that we'll get into in terms of the dismissal of like women being fans of male sports. And so I do think still there is a lot of gatekeeping in, traditional baseball media, in just baseball in general. We have seen a lot of growth in those cases, but I still think, because I always look at, why is the NFL so successful year round? How has it created this behemoth that you have no choice but to pay attention to it
Mhm.
January to December and over again? And why is baseball struggling to kind of keep up with that? And I do think it has a lot to do with that because I'm seeing the same faces and names in media. There's not a lot of other platforms that people can go to and get their media consumption from, at least in that traditional sense. That I just, and I think some of the things that they discuss, I feel like part of it is also starting to lean a little bit more into that rage bait category in
Mhm.
order to keep up with the stuff that is going online and these non-traditional media companies, these new media companies. And so I feel like again, it's just constantly alienating the fan base because it's not as accessible as it could be. Like there aren't shows that are like championing like an all panel of like women. Yes, we do have a lot more female sideline reporters and beat reporters and showing up as hosts and things on like MLB Network, things like that. But then you also look at like MLB is taking out its contract with ESPN.
Yeah.
And that's a separate conversation. I do think actually that's better for baseball because I don't feel like ESPN has given as much weight to baseball in the past several years that it used to.
Mhm.
But if you are, downsizing kind of these spaces in these areas where this content and this media consumption is accessible, and you're still staffing it with the same traditional voices, there needs to be room, there needs to be space, there needs to be opportunity to bring in again a diverse set of voices, younger voices. And I still think that the league is struggling and is still far behind on that.
Yeah, you look at like the people who do NFL content. Like, to me, one of my go-to people for NFL analysis is Mina Kimes, right?
Right.
An Asian woman, and whereas like, do we see that? I think the NBA has done a decent job of empowering Black women, for example, to be
Mm.
voices of commentary. They could do better, but they've done a decent enough job. And yeah, I agree. In baseball, you feel like it's not quite there, and it's a little bit of a disconnect. I do want to go back to one thing you mentioned earlier in on a lighthearted thing before we get into some not so lighthearted stuff in a second here. You say you've been to 30 ballparks, which bravo to you. That's fucking impressive. I guess like, what are your favorites?
Oh, it's PNC and Oracle are at the top.
Okay, easy. Yeah,
Yeah.
nice. Okay, so now we get into the not so easy question, right? So I lived for many years in Detroit, and going down to Comerica Park in the springtime, it is almost like a religious thing. You know, like they love opening day, and it's like a big thing to go down to the ballpark. Comerica's a beautiful facility. It's nice, you know, whatever. But there's this animosity I find, or I have found, that a lot of men have when it comes to women who are going down to the ballpark and, you know, enjoying a game or whatever, multiple games over the course of a summer, where it's just like they're only going there to get wasted and to just kind of as a summer activity thing. They don't really care about the sport. It's to pose with a beer and nice lighting for an Instagram photo, right? Which is incredibly dismissive, right? You know, like nobody says that about a guy going to an NFL game, right?
Right.
You know, that's not a thing. So I feel like it's more in baseball than any other sport. And I don't know if it's because it's a summer sport, it's outdoors almost exclusively, with the exception of a couple of exceptions there. I guess what do you think of that whole realm, and why do you think that's the criticism that's kind of been leveled against women who like baseball?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely illustrates one of the few points. I think overall, in general, and I think especially like as a millennial woman, you know, it's been rooted and centered in like our culture and society that there's always just been this imbalance between men and women needing to prove themselves like twice as hard, you know, across everything, to show that they have the capabilities, if not more, than men. And so there's just, I think, a lot of misogyny within that still, that, you know, men feel that they don't want to be shown up by a woman who may know more about a sport than them. You know, they haven't played baseball, so why do they get to be an authority, you know, to talk about it or to be engaged in it? And I think, you know, again, like what you illustrated about, like, I think they feel that if a woman is at a game or if they're a fan of the team, they're there for the wrong reasons. And it's like, first of all, who cares? Who cares what the reason is that they're there? Like, what is it to you? If there's no malintent in like whatever it is that they're doing, who cares? Like, how does it affect you? You know, if they're there, they're there. If they like it because they love the game, great. If it's because they found a player attractive, great. If they like think the uniforms are pretty, great. Who am I to judge and gatekeep a fandom from anybody? And two is like, who made you the authority and what wrong rules? There are no rules. There's no, it's not like in baseball, the unwritten rules. There's no wrong reason, you know, for why you should be there. And I think, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned Mina Kimes previously, because that's kind of like, I feel like one of the best examples to give that. Yes, of course she didn't play football, but she is extremely knowledgeable. She has shown that day in, day out, and it's why she is where she is, and she has the authority that she has. And yet every day she's battling like trolls, men who don't think that she should be in the spot that she's in, and she doesn't deserve to be there just because she's not a man and she didn't play the game of football. And again, it's bullshit, right? Like,
Yeah.
who gets to decide that? Like, why do you have the authority to decide that? And why do you care so much? And that's why, you know, it oftentimes leads to, you'll hear often that, you know, men will be quizzing women at the ballpark about like, how many players do you know? Like, what stats? It literally just happened to me like a couple weeks ago when I was in Arizona at spring training. And so it's everything to do with them, right? And nothing to actually do with women. It's their own inferiority complexes. It's their own misogyny that is so dismissive of, you know, women wanting to take up a space that they feel that should only be taken up by men.
You know, this whole conversation kind of reminds me a little bit of an account I follow. I'm probably about to butcher this person's last name, but she works for FanDuel. Her name is Gab Gowdy or Goody Gowdy. I can't remember how to pronounce it. But anyway, my apologies, Gab. I've actually interviewed her before. But anyway, like she'll post pictures, and this is like a woman in her early 30s or late 20s, and and all the comments, and it's just something like she's going to a Guardians game. It's like, all right, who do we got winning tonight? And then it's just like all these objectifying comments, and it just goes to show you that so many men just like feel like they could just say anything they want online, and there's no repercussions.
100%.
Which is why I always I always applaud any woman who kind of pushes back on that, because it kind of is, it's rooted in this kind of sexist ideology of, you wouldn't understand, you don't have the capacity to understand this, and the quizzing thing is just like, you could ask me again, I'll use basketball as an example. I watch NBA League Pass nightly. Like, there's some guys who come up on the screen like, oh, I don't know who that is. It's like, you're not going to know everything. And then, if somebody is going to be really committed to a team, and plus baseball, these teams play 162 times a year. It's a lot of games. So you expose yourself to that much game film, you're going to learn some things, and it's just like, so like that whole like stereotype to me is just so nonsensical. And I just kind of wonder, like, if there's ever really an avenue, like, I feel like it's a bigger social change that would need to happen of just being more accepting. I just don't understand the idea, especially for a sport like baseball that has seen some declines, right, in terms of viewership. And like, why would you not want to have a different type of fan in there? And it's like, again, I apologize. I keep on bringing up basketball in the NBA, but it's like when an international player joins in the league, right? And we see this with the Japanese fandom because of Otani in LA. It's just like Victor Wembanyama is now bringing in more French fans to watch the NBA. That should be seen as a good thing. Instead, a lot of these people, when it comes to women, look at it as a bad thing. It's like, oh, well, you wouldn't understand this meticulous sport. It's like, why do you want to keep it to yourself? It's my thing. So I guess, like, what's your viewpoint on that? Like, why is there a way where this is no longer the case, or is this kind of more of a societal disease?
I mean, I definitely think it is a societal disease, because unfortunately this isn't just limited to baseball, right? Yeah, it's across the board, and unfortunately, I think, again, given like the results of the most recent election and men being even more audacious in terms of like the things that they say and post online, it's really difficult to overcome. But again, it just goes to show that as a league, MLB could be doing more in terms of putting women forward, and not just like on Women's History Month, and not just putting them as like hosts to kind of lead conversation that the men do all the analysis. There are spaces for that. Like, I look at someone like Sarah Langs, who is so knowledgeable in like, in stats and the information and data that she puts out there. There's Meg Rowley at Fangraphs, who is so knowledgeable. And so there are women occupying these spaces. I just don't think they're being heralded. They're not being promoted as such, at least not nearly as they could be, to show that, women belong in this space. They belong in this sport. And I think that's why there's content creators and people like that taking this into their own hands. Again, like the account Ask Kate, where her whole foundation of what she has been doing has been teaching and educating female sports fans, female baseball fans, those who want to get into baseball, about the game, and putting it into bite-sized pieces of content to educate them, so that way they feel comfortable asking. And of course, they're going to feel comfortable asking another woman who is knowledgeable about it than even going to ask another man, because they don't want to feel stupid, right? They don't want to feel like they're being dismissed. So I think it's also bringing that energy that, like, you know, women are not going to be fucked with or tolerated with in this arena. Like I said, for me personally, I'm very much like, I don't care. If you start to quiz me, I will be like, absolutely not. You know, like, you can go talk to somebody else, don't talk to me, don't come with me for that. But I know not everyone is going to feel like that. So I think it's really about doing whatever, you know, we have the capacity to do to empower women to feel like, one, they don't have to take anybody's shit, two, that, you know, you can find people, you can find the tools and resources where you can enjoy yourself without concerning, you know, without the concern of men, you know, and whatever it is that you're doing. So do I believe it is much more than us? Yes, of course. Could MLB be doing more? Yes, of course. Do I think it's going to go away totally? No, because again, you look at all the work the NFL has done, you know, to bring women into the fold and to highlight them, and they're still being treated the way that they are. So it's something that it's systemic, and it's like, until we can kind of break down those systems, it's just going to be up to us as individuals to find ways to empower and communicate and bring forth whatever it is that we want to see out there.
And you brought a point about like these people who are doing great work, especially when it comes to like deep diving in numbers and statistics and all that. And baseball, especially, has really kind of been driven into the whole math problem thing, right? Which is like all these advanced sabermetrics and all that stuff. So that becomes a lot easier to understand for it totally dispels the, well, they never played thing, right? And so, and you're seeing it everywhere. You see all these like advanced analytics for the NFL and the NBA and MLB, and you would think that that's kind of this opportunity to open things up, right? To say, hey, if you understand numbers and what this means and why this is important, then you're going to be in a good spot to really talk about the sport. But, and again, in the NFL, we've seen it embraced. In the NBA, we've seen it embraced. But in baseball, which is probably the most mathematical driven sport and the most numbers obsessed sport, we haven't. And I think that's a gap. And I agree with you that the MLB should really tackle that head on, because like if you have this average age continuing to increase and increase in terms of fandom, if you're trying to bring in a new demographic, that's the easiest way to do it. It's like I hate to do MLB's job for them here, but like that's what it is, right?
100%, yeah.
Yeah. I kind of want to get into the changes of baseball. You know, there's been a lot for a sport that's so prides itself so much on tradition. They've made a lot of changes because, you know, they're kind of seeing water on the ship a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So you've had the pitch clock, the defensive shift stuff, and all that. Do you think that long term, to get people into the sport, all these changes are good or not so much?
So I will say that I'm not a baseball purist by any means. You know, I haven't minded the shorter games as a result of the pitch clock. I don't care for the pitch clock itself that much. I know it's an entirely different conversation, and, you know, we can theorize in terms of how the pitch clock may be affecting pitchers and how we're seeing far more injuries than we used to in previous seasons. I do feel, though, especially with every kind of new bit of news that comes out, you know, during the season or during the off season, from the commissioner's office, that I do feel like they're trying to micromanage this game to death. And they're doing it, or they're trying to say they're doing it in the interest of growing the game. But it is coming at the expense of the players and for the fans that are already, you know, interested in the game, rather than tackling things about, you know, how can we better like lift blackout restrictions? How can we work with the RSNs to, you know, because again, it goes back to kind of like how we started, you know, this conversation, that one of the reasons that I was really able to cultivate my love for baseball and learn so much about it was the accessibility I had to be able to watch so much of it, and not just watch, you know, my local teams. Like the fact that I was able to watch teams from the East Coast, the teams from, you know, the Midwest, you know, so I think that's definitely one of them. And So I don't mind all the changes. I do think I hated the shift. That was annoying, especially like, you know, you love it when it's like it works for your team, but you hate it when it goes against your team. So I think they could also just be doing a better job overall marketing its teams and players. You know, I think one of the conversations, like at least in the media, is like they're salivating for the fact that last season was a Yankees and Dodgers World Series, because like that is
Big
what
markets.
you want, right? Like that is peak media. But the fans, unless you were Dodgers or Yankees fans, are like, oh, God, okay. So it's like you get like the two teams that MLB already talks about, already covers all of their players. And, you know, it just feels like they don't care about the 28 other teams and the players that are involved when you have so many interesting young players that are being developed, and you still have really like powerful veterans like a Mike Trout. Granted, he's been hurt, that you could really be marketing around. Like, yeah, you're going to be able to ride the marketing machine that is Shohei Ohtani for several more years to come, but he can market himself too. Like you're already going to get that attention from him alone. So what is stopping you from shifting focus to kind of celebrate and elevate some of these other teams that maybe are in smaller markets that people aren't necessarily going to know if they're just like a casual fan or part of like, you know, a fleeting fan base or whatever it is. So there's other areas that MLB could be focusing their resources and their time in, and it won't come at the player's expense or the fans' expense that are already, you know, in it for the love of the game.
You know, we've talked a lot about the NFL in comparison here. The one thing the NFL does great is doesn't matter. The market is irrelevant. You
Right.
know, like you have stars in Kansas City, right? Like if you had a star in the Royals, everybody would say when are they trading him to the Dodgers, or when are they trading him to the Yankees or the Mets or whoever, you know, has a bunch of money.
Yeah,
And
and the reality is Kansas City does. They have Bobby Witt Jr., who they extended and is going to be essentially a Royal for the better part of his career, and was, you know, in the MVP voting. And I know we'll talk about predictions and stuff later, but you know, like he definitely, I feel like he's going to break through this season in that. So, but again, that illustrates a point that there is, that does exist. I just don't think, you know, they market it well.
yeah, and the marketability I find interesting because we're currently in this TikTok short video era. I would argue probably right up there with basketball. Baseball is the sport that's best designed for the TikTok highlight. You know, like you think about like a web gem in the outfield, somebody hitting a
Absolutely.
home run. You know, it's just like that is a 10 to 15-second clip that's waiting to happen with slow mo effects and all that. And I just feel like they haven't really capitalized on that. I mean, do you think that their strategy for, because highlights are what get people in, right? You see
Mhm.
an athletic play, you know, I equate like, you know, a catch at the wall or something is kind of like the dunk in basketball. It's just like you see it like, wow, look at all this athleticism. And that in turn gets you interested in the game. I mean, do you think they've kind of failed in that regard to capitalize on those type of moments to get people at the very least to be more aware that games are going on and that this you should watch out for this player or that player?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, definitely, because also, you know, MLB headquarters is located on the East Coast. So when, you know, we bring up things such as like East Coast bias and whatnot, the reality is like if there are games happening on the West Coast, majority of the East Coast has already gone to bed, and you know, no one's paying attention. So I feel like that's even more, aside from, you know, say the Dodgers, that's even more, you know, leaving a lot of teams and players and opportunities on the table just because they're not awake anymore, you know, to even see what's going on out there. I also feel like, and this is coming from someone as so professionally, like I have worked in social media my entire career. So I do look at things differently when I'm looking at other, you know, organizations, brands, that sort of thing. And of course, I think MLB could be doing better in that regard. That still goes back to the marketability of some of the other players and teams that I feel like they're falling short in doing so. But I think a lot still gets left on the table. They have they have multiple platforms and profiles for different iterations of things. Like one thing will be for culture, one thing will be for, like their Latin and Hispanic markets, and one thing will be for like fashion or like whatever it is. And it's like nobody wants to follow 20 different, types of accounts on the same platform for one overarching like league, especially when that's like they're kind of falling short in other areas. And so I think there's always going to be more opportunity to do more. And I feel like, what they do is like right now during spring training is like they'll go to Arizona, they'll go to Florida and bank up a lot of stuff with a lot of players that they don't necessarily focus on like throughout the season, right? It's just kind of like this was a very limited time, like we're going to focus on these individuals. So I think there is still a lot of like opportunity. I know they're constantly hiring, new creators and things like that. And I feel like they've slowly started kind of adopting a little bit of a TikTok format. But again, when you're already kind of behind, it's just really difficult to catch up, especially with what the other leagues have already been doing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I do want to pivot here into a lot of things about your content seem to mirror the ballpark experience. And I guess for you, why was that the focus? And what to you makes it so special of an experience? Because I do agree that going to a live baseball game is an experience unlike any other. So I guess from your vantage point, what makes it so special?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I really got, initiated my love for the game, was being able to physically go and experience it for myself. And I think especially from that time, and considering now that I've been to 30 of the ballparks, that a lot of things have changed. And I think one thing that has been really well done, especially with some of the ballparks that have kind of shown up in the last like decade or so, they've really cultivated it to be an experience for people, regardless of whether you're a diehard fan or not. So, certain aspects of it, like, so of course, you have like the history of like a Fenway or a Wrigley, right? Which makes it cool in itself. And they have their quirks and features and the historical aspects of it. And then you have some of these newer ballparks that they have made it so that way you can kind of enjoy yourself throughout the game, whether you're watching or whether you're out in the concourse or whatever may be the case. And especially for me, as someone who's just like who loves like traveling, for me, it's just been a fun experience to go to all these cities that I might have not have otherwise necessarily gone to experience them, experience their culture. And for me, there's nothing like experiencing a live game. I think if you've seen like in the past couple of weeks, like the rollout of like those memes of images from ballparks, and it's like this and like a beer and this and like a glizzy. It's an immersive experience, and it brings about different things. Like you're definitely going to have like the people that are in it for the game itself and just focus on the game. And then you're going to have the people that are like, this is just a nice like summer evening out. This is just a nice thing to do on a Wednesday afternoon. And especially considering kind of what my original intent was with the platform, I didn't want to abandon, the roots of that. And being able to discuss ballparks, showcase ballparks, and, put together like guides for people, that want to go, and arm them with the information that they may need in order to know like what they should do, where they should sit, like what should they eat, like how much is it going to cost me, and ensuring that I'm trying to work towards like making things like equitable, for everyone. So that was kind of where it was.
Yeah, and it's all like the different cities, and obviously all these places have like all their food items and stuff now, which is just another draw. It's just a whole experience that I think is so unique
Mm-hmm.
in the sports world. Uh, Kind of closing out here, I guess, kind of rapid fire quickly. Season's upon us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any big, not necessarily bold, just any predictions of what we might be seeing unfold this season?
Yeah, I actually feel like the most competitive division, NL and AL combined, is going to come out of the AL Central. I think, the Royals obviously got in last year into the playoffs after losing like 100 games like the season before. The Tigers snuck in there, and they have a great, pitching staff and a lot of good young core. I think the Guardians took a little bit of a step back in terms of they didn't make any major moves this offseason, but I think compared to kind of what the AL West did and looking at a lot of the injuries like in the AL East, I think overall, like I am looking to them to be kind of like the most competitive division overall. I believe Bobby Witt will actually win the MVP this season in the AL. Yeah, I think nothing against Aaron Judge. He's a phenomenal talent, phenomenal player, but at some point, I think there's got to be more than being able to hit a lot of home runs. So I actually think the Nationals are going to surprise a lot of people. I feel, and this is kind of just based on a small sample size, that I watched them last year play, that they actually have good young talent. And it's been a lot of trying seasons for them, especially after they won the World Series in 2019. But I feel like they are on the up. I don't necessarily think they're going to do anything big or like surprise anyone in the sense of like sneaking into the playoffs or anything like that. But I think their record is going to be a lot better than it has been in the past couple of seasons. And I wouldn't be surprised if Skeens got the Cy Young this year, because he was in the voting last season.
Yeah.
And so I think if he has a full season under his belt, I think he can definitely do that. And then personally for me, if Mike Trout can stay healthy, I fully expect him to bash like 40 home runs.
Hopefully, the health thing's a big thing, and I'm excited about the AL Central as well as somebody who knows a lot of Tigers fans. So from my days living in Detroit, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And I haven't been as tapped in, but I think you sold me. So I think you sold me on this game.
I was surprised as anyone last season when I saw that the Tigers snuck in there. Into the playoffs, and they really, they held their own. I did not expect them to go very far, but the fact that they got as close as they did, I think, considering where they were just like a season prior, is pretty remarkable.
I mean, considering where they were for the past decade, is
well, that too.
But Neha, thank you so much for joining me. This was a really an illuminating conversation. Love talking to you about this, and I guess let everybody know where they can follow you and all your content that you're putting out there.
Yeah, no. So definitely follow Girls at the Ballpark. I'm on Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok. And eventually we'll be launching a YouTube channel as well. So yeah, wherever you are, I am, unless it's X.
No, nothing there. Yeah,
Nothing
stay out of there. So thank you, everybody, as always, for tuning in to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider following us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Until next time, I'm Omar Zaran, your host, and we will see you later.